Defense Alliance, and we are asking this morning that you reject this project as too damaging, insufficiently analyzed and mitigated. There are better alternatives available. The benefits are not documented and do not outweigh the costs, which I'll talk about and address you. Also here this morning from Colonel Fraser West and his daughter Sandra West, other people with the Alliance, because I think with all the paper, there's certainly a lot of our letters and responses. With all of this, I do believe it's very important to look into the faces of the people that will be impacted by this project and live with the consequences for 50 years of what this would be doing. We have submitted a number of letters, and they are in the various staff reports, and we realize this is a very serious matter and appreciate the very thoughtful consideration that is being given to it. I know there's a lot of people in the room with open minds about this, still thinking about where to go, not necessarily people with the buttons like I've got, not necessarily some of the others, but I know there are people with open minds, and we'd like to ask that you seriously consider what you hear this morning. There are also petitions that have been submitted. Yes, they're from around the world, but they're also from here within the county. As I understand, over 100 signatures opposing this project, people realizing the concerns that are here and asking that you be very mindful of them. In this, it in some ways seems like a lot of what is said on one side and then the other side. In this context, I think it's so important to look at what is said by independent agencies. The primary, the lead-off independent letter that I'd start with is from Caltrans, the Department of Transportation. This was written by the chief of the Office of Rural Planning and Administration. And when you have a government official, I mean, I was in the Navy myself. I know when you're an officer and you're in the government, you've got a chain of command to get these things through. You've got to be very deliberate and careful about your comments and what you say. And in this letter from Caltrans, what they said, after having gone through this process of very careful evaluation, is that the final EIR fails to adequately identify, disclose, and mitigate for potentially significant impacts. And they recommended that the lead agency not certify the EIR, that it be revised and recirculated for agency and public review. Now, there's a memo from Caltrans in your packet I just saw this morning, October 5th. I'll talk about that in a bit, but it certainly did not retract this statement from the chief of the Office of Rural Planning and Administration. There is also a memo that we've submitted because it appeared nobody else did, and this is a memo from Ray Kapahi, a private air consultant with air permitting specialists, who wrote to the Air Pollution Control Officer for the Amador Air District to say that part of the analysis regarding the standards that were used in this EIR, and here I quote, would not stand up to legal scrutiny. That's what his memo said on February 12, 2012. And he had no reason to make something up. He considered his opinion, and that's what it was about that. There is also information which we have submitted from the geologist named Jeff Light, very highly qualified individual in the construction aggregate industry, and his considered opinion was that in various ways the analysis of the EIR did not meet regulatory, professional, and industry standards. This was with regard to asbestos investigation, with regard to overburden stockpiles and slope stability calculations, with regard to water wells, elevation, and quality. And a lot of the shortcomings have to do with the failure of investigations or the incompleteness, the inadequacy of what was done, not necessarily the answers to the questions that were answered, but the questions that went unanswered. So at the end of this, we have an inadequate, still incomplete EIR, and we urge you to take the time that's necessary to do it right, to make sure it is a full disclosure document so that the public, as well as you as the decision makers, can understand what the impacts will be and assure the public, the people in the community, that the air health, the environment, and their valley, their homes are being protected if this project were to be approved. So we agree with Caltrans and others who have said that this EIR should be recirculated. Our reasons go beyond the traffic impacts. We do find there is new information, which I'll highlight. There are other reasons than just the new information that's been added. There are also feasible mitigation measures and alternatives that have been identified that have not been adopted by the project proponent. These are additional bases for recirculation of the environmental impact report. I'll explain that in a moment. With regard to traffic, the new significant information that we point out is this. In the draft EIR, the conclusion was stated that with the addition of project traffic, all study intersections were forecast to continue to operate at level of service C or better. Level of service C is not bad. It's actually a pretty clear level of traffic. In the EIR, the final EIR, it was acknowledged, not level of service C, but level of service E, echo. A very severely impacted level of service is what various intersections would be operating at, including Preston Avenue at East Plymouth Highway. Now, the explanation for this, and it's set forth in the draft report, is, the staff report, is in the beginning, in the draft EIR, it had to do with overall intersection quality, but on the final EIR, it had to do with the worst side street. Well, the fact of the matter is, the initial document said it would not be significant, and the later document said it did. There may be some shadings in there, but that's what it comes down to, what the public was reading. Now, Caltrans called for more mitigation measures. This was part of the reason for their submitting that letter I quoted earlier. There are various measures that could be adopted and implemented, but apparently, in Caltrans' opinion, they have not been. This came up at the Planning Commission, or various measures were identified. One of those was raised and asked for by the superintendent of the Amador County Unified School District, Superintendent Locke. He asked for a left turn lane to protect school children in Ione Elementary. The response to his request was, it's not needed. Well, I think that has to be examined very closely. We ask that you do that because the school children in Ione Elementary obviously deserve protection if they can be. Another measure that was identified in the Planning Commission that was eventually rejected was to restrict the hours of operation of the quarry, perhaps, as a way that the trucks would only come at certain times of the day. Now, this was also rejected on the spot as an infeasible mitigation measure because it would interfere with the economics of the project. Well, we've not seen, we don't have the evidence of what the economics of the project are. So the economic infeasibility that was asserted is an unfounded assertion. Without the documentation, the numbers to show why it would be economically infeasible to, for instance, restrict hours of operations to after 9 a.m. or on certain days of the week, the evidence is not there to support the finding of economic infeasibility, if that is a finding that would be found. Let me turn to, if I may, the air quality portion of the analysis. And this was one area where the EIR did acknowledge significant impacts with regard to particulate matter and with regard to nitrous oxides. And while acknowledging the significance of these impacts, we don't believe there was enough acknowledgement of the health impacts of those impacts done with regard to decreased lung function, with regard to respiratory illnesses. There is an appendix in the EIR, it's Appendix D in the draft EIR, that purported to deal with health impacts, but dealt with it from a chronic perspective, not the acute level of impacts that diesel particulate matter and silica dust might cause. If anybody, well, who am I to say? people know that dust is bad for your health, and dust in the air for people who are vulnerable, especially, let's say, a population that is elderly or already in a condition that is not ready to be impacted, that is vulnerable, especially vulnerable, those impacts should be analyzed for their acute effects of that dust in the air, and it was not in this Appendix D. The EIR did acknowledge the emissions would be 1,700 pounds a day, far exceeding the 384 pound a day threshold of particulate matter. It also acknowledged 560 pounds a day of nitrous oxides. That's an ozone chemical. It's a precursor. It forms ozone. And the threshold there is 80 pounds a day. So 560 is about 7 times that threshold. This is in a non-attainment area, again, as everybody knows, I'm sure. And because this would make non-attainment worse, that means there are other sources out there that would have to reduce their operations or curtail or not even operate in order for this to be approved. That's how offsets might be obtained. It's a question in our mind where offsets would even be obtained or if they're available. The Amador Air District did not comment on this EIR. We're puzzled by that. They had not received an application for air permits. Apparently this would be afterwards, but we've talked with industry sources who have pointed out that oftentimes these are done concurrently and should be, because that is where you would get straight information about the air impacts. Instead of commenting about this, there are apparently consultations that were done. There are memos that were generated, like the one I read that said some of the analysis would not stand up to legal scrutiny. But that's not in the EIR. We believe it should have been so that everybody could evaluate it. And still on air quality impacts, the sensitive receptors, that's just a word. Sensitive receptors are people. They're the people behind me in the room. They're the people you'll hear about more. They're the people, the ranchers right next door, the people in the city of Ione, the people in the prison, the people in the CAL FIRE Academy. Those are the sensitive receptors. And it's our understanding that the prison administration was not even notified about this proposal or this EIR and the potential impacts. The staff report has pointed out that they did submit a letter and they said they did not object, but they confirmed they weren't notified. They didn't have a chance to evaluate and object if they wanted to, because they were not told about this, and they should have been. Finally, about air quality, the Amador Air District rules contain various provisions, one of which was not dealt with. This, again, is an area where, among all that paperwork, and I've looked closely, and I could be wrong, but I don't believe there is any analysis of rule number 207.1 regarding asphalt concrete plants. And that particular rule prohibits the construction or modification if particulate matter will exceed a certain level. Without an answer of whether that level is exceeded, it's not clear. The EIR should have answered that question. Let me move on, please, to the water questions. Water is